Hey, my name's Tom. I'm 22 in my last year of college, and honestly, I live a pretty regular life. I go to class, work part-time at a hardware store, and hang out with my buddies when I can. I'm not the party type. I'm more of a keep-to-myself kind of guy, but I've got this one best friend, Jake. We've known each other since middle school. He's like a brother to me. So this story, I didn't see it coming at all. It started a while back. I was leaving the grocery store just picking up some stuff for my apartment. It was a sunny Saturday, nothing special. I was heading to my car when I spotted someone struggling with two big bags of groceries. It was Jake's mom, Mrs. Karen. I hadn't seen her in a while, maybe since Jake's birthday last year. She looked different. I mean, she's always been nice, always friendly, but I guess I never really noticed how put together she was. She was wearing this light dress, hair up, sunglasses. She smiled when she recognized me. "Oh, Tom. Wow, it's been a while." "Yeah," I said, walking up to her. "You need a hand with those?" She laughed. "Would you? That would be amazing. I may have gone a little overboard." I took her bags and she led me to her car. We chatted a bit, small talk mostly. She asked about school, how my parents were doing, and I asked her the same. She said Jake was out with friends for the weekend. When we got to her house, she opened the garage and said, "Would you mind just helping me carry these into the kitchen? It's just easier that way." I didn't think twice. I followed her in. The house hadn't changed much since we were teens, hanging out in Jake's room playing video games. The kitchen was spotless, and the sunlight made the whole place feel warm. I dropped the bags on the counter and started helping her put a few things away. "Tom," she said suddenly, "can I offer you a coffee or something? You've been a huge help." I hesitated. "Sure, yeah, coffee sounds good." She smiled again, that same warm, polite smile, and moved toward the coffee maker. We sat down at the kitchen table. It felt casual, comfortable even. She asked about what I was studying, if I was dating anyone, what I planned to do after graduation. It was weird, not in a bad way, just different. She seemed genuinely interested, not like a mom checking in, but more like someone who actually wanted to know me. I asked how things were going with her, and she shrugged a little. "Oh, work's busy. Jake's rarely home. It gets a little quiet around here." She looked out the window for a second, then back at me. "You always were the polite one. Even as a kid, Jake would bring over all kinds of chaos, and you were the one who helped clean up afterward." I laughed a little awkwardly. Well, someone had to. We finished our coffee, and I stood up to leave. "Thanks for the drink, Mrs. K." She walked me to the door. "Thank you again for helping me, Tom." "Seriously, you're welcome here any time." I stepped outside, waved goodbye, and walked back to my car. I couldn't explain it, but something about that visit stuck with me. Not in a bad way, just, I don't know, she seemed different. Or maybe I was seeing things differently now. Either way, I didn't think much more of it, at least not yet. The next time I saw Mrs. Karen was a few days later. I wasn't planning on it. I was driving past her street on the way home from class, and she happened to be outside watering her front yard. She waved as I slowed down, so I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Hey, Tom, how's school treating you?" she asked, smiling like she'd been waiting to see someone familiar. Same old," I replied. "Just trying to survive finals week." She laughed. "Want a quick break from reality? I got iced tea inside real stuff, not the bottled kind." I hesitated just a moment too long, but then I nodded. "Sure, why not?" I parked and followed her inside again. It was warm that day, and the cool air inside her house felt amazing. She brought out two glasses of tea with lemon, placed them on the coffee table, and sat across from me on the couch. We started talking at first about school, then about books, then somehow about relationships. I didn't even notice the shift at first, but it got personal kind of fast. She asked if I was seeing anyone. I said no. She raised an eyebrow and smiled. "That surprises me," she said. "You're smart, kind, and honestly, you've grown into quite a handsome young man." That caught me off guard, a compliment from someone like her. It didn't feel wrong, just unexpected. I didn't know what to say, so I kind of laughed it off. Thanks. I guess you're being too nice. I'm just being honest, she replied, sipping her tea, slowly holding my gaze just a second longer than necessary. Sometimes people don't hear it enough, and it's nice to feel noticed, right? I nodded, not really knowing how to respond. I could feel something in the air shift, not heavy or uncomfortable, just different, like we weren't talking, like my friend's mom and me anymore, but like two adults having a real conversation. I tried to keep things light, talked about some dumb story from class that made her laugh. But even while we joked, I could feel it, the energy, the tone. It wasn't flirtatious in an obvious way, but there was something there. When I finally stood up to leave, she walked me to the door again. This time when I said goodbye, she gently touched my arm, just for a second, but it lingered. Tom, she said softly, I really enjoy talking to you. You're easy to be around. I smiled, but my brain was spinning. Same here. I walked back to my car slower than usual, sat behind the wheel for a bit before starting the engine. I kept replaying things in my head, the way she looked at me, the compliment, the arm touch. Was it just kindness? Was I overthinking it? Back at home, I told myself it was nothing. I mean, she was just being friendly, a mom who was probably a little bored, a little lonely, and I happened to be around. Still, I couldn't ignore the fact that I'd noticed how good she looked, or how easy it was to talk to her, or how she made me feel like I mattered in a way most people didn't. But I shoved those thoughts away. She was Jake's mom, end of story. I wasn't going to be the guy who got weird about something like this. At least, that's what I told myself. It had been a week since I last saw Mrs. Karen, and to be honest, I wasn't sure what I was even thinking. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head, but every time I passed her street or saw her name pop up on my phone when Jake texted me, I couldn't help but think back to the last time we talked. I told myself it was nothing, just a couple of friendly conversations, nothing more. But then Jake sent me a message. Hey, I'm out of town this weekend. Mom's on her own. Can you check in on her sometime? I thought about it for a minute, then replied, yeah, sure, no problem. It wasn't like I had anything better to do. The weekend was going to be quiet. So I drove over to her place on Saturday afternoon, figuring I'd just pop in for a minute to make sure she was all right. Maybe help her with something if she needed it. Nothing too intense, just a friendly thing to do. When I got there, I knocked on the door. Mrs. Karen opened it almost immediately, and when she saw me, she lit up. Tom, you're a lifesaver. Come in, she said, stepping aside so I could walk in. I followed her into the living room, and immediately the smell of fresh-baked cookies hit me. She had clearly been busy. Can I get you something to drink? She asked, already heading to the kitchen. Water's fine, I said, sitting down on the couch. It felt strange, like this wasn't the usual setup. Normally, I would have just been hanging out with Jake, not alone with her. She came back a minute later with a glass of water and a plate of cookies. I took the water, but I wasn't really hungry. I could feel the awkwardness settling in. Thanks, but I'm good, I said, trying to lighten the mood. Just wanted to make sure you were all right, you know. She nodded. I appreciate it, Tom. It's just been a quiet weekend, honestly. Jake's always out doing his thing, and it gets a little lonely. I didn't know what to say to that. I knew she'd been married for years, but something about the way she said it made me feel like she was more than just lonely. It made me wonder if maybe she was hinting at something deeper. So what's new with you? She asked after a pause. How's school going? Any exciting plans after graduation? We started talking, the conversation drifting between school and life in general. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but there was this undercurrent of something I couldn't shake. She was sitting a little closer than usual, laughing a little too hard at things that weren't that funny. I couldn't help but notice the way her eyes lingered on me when she spoke, how her body language was just different. At one point, I caught myself looking at her a little too long. Her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, looked soft in the sunlight streaming through the windows. She had this elegance to her, even in the casual outfit she was wearing. I had seen her like this before, but now it felt like I was noticing things I hadn't before. She caught me staring for a split second, and there was this moment of silence. Neither of us said anything, but I felt my heart skip a beat. She didn't look away immediately, though. Instead, she gave me a slight smile, not one that screamed flirtation. But it wasn't entirely innocent either. There was an almost knowing look in her eyes. "Tom," she said quietly, breaking the silence, "you've always been such a good kid. It's nice to see how you've turned out. You're mature for your age." "Thanks," I muttered, unsure what to say. I felt a little exposed, like she was seeing something in me that I didn't even want to acknowledge. "Really," she said softly, "I mean it. You're different from most of the guys your age. It's refreshing." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak for a moment. I was starting to feel like I was in a situation where I didn't really know what the right move was. She was a grown woman, and I knew there was an age gap between us, but the way she was looking at me, it was like she wasn't seeing me as just Jake's friend anymore. The room felt a little warmer all of a sudden. I shifted uncomfortably on the couch, but she didn't seem to notice. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Sure," I replied, though I wasn't sure where this conversation was heading. She hesitated, then spoke again, her voice softer this time. "What's it like, being young and having your whole life ahead of you?" I felt the weight of her words, like they carried something more than just curiosity. "I don't know," I said. "Honestly, I guess it's a little scary sometimes, but I try to focus on what's right in front of me, like schoolwork, just getting through it all." She nodded slowly, but I noticed the sadness in her expression. "Yeah, I get that. I suppose we all have our own fears no matter how old we are." I wanted to ask more, to dig into what she meant by that, but I didn't. The moment felt too fragile, and I didn't want to overstep. Still, something in the way she spoke made me feel like I was crossing a line without even realizing it. Eventually, I stood up to leave. It wasn't that I felt uncomfortable. It was more like I felt like I was starting to understand something I hadn't before, something I didn't want to deal with. She walked me to the door, and before I stepped out, she placed her hand on my arm again. "I'm really glad you stopped by, Tom," she said, her voice low. "You're always welcome here." I smiled, but the feeling in my chest was heavy. "Thanks, Mrs. Karen." As I walked to my car, I knew something had shifted, but I wasn't sure what it meant or what I was supposed to do about it. It's funny how fast a situation can escalate without you even realizing it. I told myself I was just helping out, just being a good guy, checking in on my friend's mom while he was away. But with each visit, things felt more complicated. I was starting to feel this weird pull every time I went over there, like something between us that wasn't exactly friendship, but it wasn't anything I could name either. It was one of those strange, quiet Saturday afternoons when I found myself back at her place. Jake had texted me earlier in the day, asking if I could swing by to help his mom with something around the house. I didn't mind, it was the kind of thing I'd do for anyone, and I figured it would be a quick in and out job. But when I got there, I didn't expect to see her like this. When Mrs. Karen opened the door, I noticed right away she wasn't wearing the usual casual clothes. She had on a nice fitted blouse, a little more formal than what she'd usually wear at home. It caught me off guard, but I tried not to let it show. "Hey, Tom," she greeted me, her smile a little brighter than usual. "I'm so glad you came over. I just need help with a few things in the backyard." I followed her outside and we got to work. The task wasn't difficult, just moving some furniture around, rearranging a few things. But there was this weird energy in the air. I couldn't quite explain it, but it felt like she was paying more attention to me than she usually did. We were working in the yard for a while, talking here and there, but most of the time it was just the sound of the wind and us moving things around. At some point, I bent down to adjust something, and when I stood up, I was a little closer to her than I'd realized. She didn't move back. Instead, she smiled softly and said, "You're really good at this. You know I'm lucky to have you around." I chuckled, trying to brush it off. It's no big deal. But she didn't let it go. She kept looking at me like I was something more than just Jake's friend. It was subtle, a glance here, a pause in conversation there, but I felt it, and it made my stomach turn. I didn't know how to respond. It wasn't like I didn't appreciate the attention. In fact, I found myself flattered, but at the same time, it felt wrong. We worked for another half hour before she called a break. She handed me a cold drink, and we sat down on the patio to relax for a minute. As I took a sip, she said something that made my heart race. You know, Tom, she started, her voice a little softer than usual. I've been thinking about what we talked about the other day, how you said you're scared about the future, about figuring everything out. I get that. I was taken aback. I hadn't expected her to bring it up again. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's overwhelming sometimes. I said, trying to sound casual, even though I wasn't sure where this conversation was going. She nodded thoughtfully, her gaze drifting toward the yard. It's hard, it really is. But you know, it's not just the future that's scary. Sometimes it's the present. Sometimes you get stuck and you don't even realize it until someone comes along and makes you see things differently. I wasn't sure what she meant by that, but it felt like she wasn't talking about the future anymore. It was like she was talking about something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of the moment. We were silent for a while, and I was starting to feel uneasy. I wanted to leave, but I didn't know how to just walk out. I didn't want to be rude, especially not to Jake's mom. But then, as if to break the tension, she turned to me with a smile and said, I'm sorry if I'm making things awkward. I guess I just like talking to you. You're easy to be around. I forced a smile back. No, it's fine. I get it. But deep down, I felt that something was shifting, like I couldn't see things clearly anymore. It wasn't just about helping her with the yard or having a few casual conversations. It felt more like we were crossing some invisible line that I wasn't sure how to navigate. As I got up to leave, she walked me to the door again. This time, though, she didn't just say goodbye like usual. Instead, she stood there for a moment looking at me. It was that look again, the one that felt like she was seeing something more in me than she should have. You know, Tom, she said slowly, I'm really glad you've been around. I just want you to know you're a good guy. I didn't know how to respond to that. I smiled, said a quick goodbye, and left. But as I walked back to my car, I could feel my mind racing. What the hell was happening? I had to remind myself that this wasn't normal. She was Jake's mom. She was older than me. Nothing was supposed to happen. Still, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the boundaries between us were becoming less clear with every visit. I could still feel the weight of that moment. The look on Mrs. Karen's face when I left her house a few days ago, it stuck with me. I hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. Everything felt strange, like the ground beneath me was shifting, and I didn't know which direction to go in. I'd been avoiding her calls, telling myself it was just a misunderstanding, just a moment of misplaced kindness. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Jake was away again, and Mrs. Karen had called me asking if I could come by to fix something around the house. I didn't want to, honestly. The thought of going over there facing her again made me feel like I was walking on a tightrope, but I also didn't want to leave her hanging. So I agreed. It was just one more favor, nothing more, nothing less. When I arrived, I felt that same tension in the air. Mrs. Karen greeted me with a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was something unspoken between us, a weight that neither of us could ignore. She asked me to help with the garage, something simple, just organizing some things. It wasn't difficult, but it felt like every movement I made in that space was scrutinized. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for something, or maybe I was waiting for something from her. Neither of us was saying it out loud, but the silence spoke volumes. As I finished up in the garage, she came up behind me, her presence too close for comfort. She touched my arm lightly as she spoke, and I could feel her fingers linger just a moment too long. You've been so kind to me, Tom, she said quietly, her voice soft, almost vulnerable. I've really appreciated everything you have done for me, for us. I turned to look at her, and for the first time I saw a sadness in her eyes. It wasn't the flirtatiousness I had been noticing before. This was something deeper, something more unsettling. I opened my mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. I felt the weight of the situation press down on me. This wasn't just about helping out anymore. This wasn't just about me being a good guy. There were feelings involved now, feelings that neither of us had been brave enough to address, but I couldn't keep pretending I didn't feel it too. I couldn't pretend I didn't know what was happening. I think we need to talk about this. I finally said, my voice low, about what's been happening about us. She stepped back, looking at me with wide eyes. It was as though I'd caught her off guard. She hadn't been expecting me to say it, to put it out there, to acknowledge what had been happening between us. I don't want it to make this awkward, I continued. But this, whatever it is, it's not right. I don't know what you want, but I know what I don't want. She looked down for a moment, her hands clasped together tightly in front of her. When she looked back up at me, there was a resignation in her expression, like she finally understood that I wasn't going to let this go any further. You're right, she said quietly. I've crossed a line and I'm sorry. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. It wasn't easy to say, but I knew I had to draw the line somewhere. I couldn't get caught up into something I wasn't comfortable with, no matter how much she may have wanted it or how much I had enjoyed the attention. This wasn't something I could pursue, not with her, not like this. I paused, trying to gather my thoughts before I said the next part. You're Jake's mom, and you're a good person. I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt you or him. She nodded slowly, her lips trembling, just slightly. I know, I never meant for this to happen. I just, I've been lonely, Tom, and I thought maybe, just maybe you could fill that gap for me. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but at the same time, I knew this was something I had to walk away from. This wasn't the kind of situation I wanted to find myself in, and it wasn't the kind of relationship I wanted to have with her. I'm sorry, I said again, my voice steady now. I think you deserve more than this. You deserve someone who can really be there for you, someone who can give you what you need. There was a long silence between us after that. I could feel the weight of it, the heaviness of what we had both just admitted. But I also knew it was the right decision. I wasn't going to let something messy and complicated cloud the friendship I had with Jake. I wasn't going to risk losing that over a moment of weakness. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, she stopped me. Tom, she said, her voice small. I understand. Thank you for being honest with me. I nodded and gave her a small smile before walking out the door. As I stepped into the yard, I couldn't shake the feeling of relief mixed with guilt. But I also knew I had done the right thing. There was no turning back, and I wasn't going to let things get any more complicated. I got in my car and drove away, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. It was over, and it was for the best. The story of Tom and Mrs. Karen imparts a deeply emotional life lesson about the importance of setting boundaries to protect our values and relationships, even when faced with tempting or confusing emotions. Tom's journey from innocently helping his friend's mother to confronting the subtle shift in their dynamic underscores the courage it takes to recognize when a situation risks crossing ethical lines. His decision to address the growing tension with honesty, despite Mrs. Karen's vulnerability and his own fleeting attraction, teaches us that true integrity means prioritizing long-term consequences over momentary desires. Mrs. Karen's loneliness highlights how emotional voids can lead to unintended advances, reminding us to approach others' vulnerabilities with empathy but firmness. By choosing to preserve his friendship with Jake and respect the familial bond, Tom demonstrates that sometimes the hardest but most rewarding path is the one that maintains trust and honor. This narrative is a heartfelt call to listen to our instincts, act with clarity, and safeguard the connections that matter most, even when it means stepping away from something that feels compelling in the moment. Please share your reflections in the comments. Have you ever had to draw a boundary to protect a relationship? Your stories inspire and strengthen our community. If this tale moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to join our journey of authentic storytelling. Let's keep exploring life's meaningful lessons together.